Hi, my name is Eric Dewar. I'm Associate Professor of Biology at Suffolk University in Boston, and there I teach a class about evolution for students who don't major in science called Humans and the Evolutionary Perspective. I'm here with a couple of my honor students today, and we're going to talk about an article that we read. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Rhea.
Hi, I'm Vanessa.
Right. So this article was about using evolutionary explanations to talk about criminality. Um, And I'm always interested in reading stuff like this because when we talk with other people about when I justify like why we learn evolution with other people, I always talk about it as like a toolbox that we can use for explaining behaviors that we see in people. Um, what did you want to start talking about in this article that we read?
So, a lot of like the article like talked about different kind of conditions and different hypotheses that could explain as to why criminal behavior or like violent behavior and aggressive behavior was like acceptable in a evolutionary perspective. And like Thorner and Palmer actually had like two hypotheses about this, and it was one that like they were specifically talking about rape, and it was rape could have evolved due to tension between men and women in terms of reproductive strategies. And then there was a second hypothesis, which was a byproduct hypothesis, and it was that males strong sex drive and desire to mate with several females and can accidentally lead to rape. And they're like in detail it talks about like why and how it could be a possibility, and but however it can be dangerous because they can also produce genes of more like genes that contain features that would make a male more likely to um, see sex in a forcible manner as more acceptable than in a consent manner, because it just increases their likelihood of reproductive success overall, which is dangerous too. And it talks about that as well.
I mean, we're of course with this we see kind of a tight correlation between genes and behavior, and we're always reluctant in assigning a particular behavior or some like major attribute of the phenotype to like single genes. But I hear what you're saying. If we're talking about, you know, does this mean this is evolutionary selection for these kinds of antisocial, antisocial sort of aggressive behaviors?
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, this is great that you started with like the easiest possible topic today. Yeah. So Vanessa, what do you want to throw onto this? And let's sort of like, what did you get away from the arguments about like why rape?
I don't know, like for the theory that it is an evolutionary sexual strategy, I don't know, I'm a little bit critical of that because I feel like it's also a little bit difficult to test it. Like, wouldn't that mean that if somebody's a rapist, like if they have children, like they're gonna be rapists too if it has evolved as like a genetic component to evolution? But the byproduct rule, actually, I think it makes sense in a way because if because they're saying that strong sex drive has led like to rape as an accident, kind of like a byproduct because of this type of behavior. It would make sense that it could potentially lead to that.
So there are other kinds of mammals that have like harems. Think like elephant seals, where they will the big alpha male elephant seal is called the beachmaster, and the beachmaster like has this harem of females that he mates with, and most of the kids are his. There's this evolutionary selection for like aggression, territoriality, mating drive, and what it ends up with at the end is basically the bigger stronger males end up being the ones who are more successful, but only up to a certain point. Past this point, basically they get so aggressive that they start killing off the babies too. So that's so it ends up kind of having a wall where they once they get to a certain point, it's not selected for anymore. But these are looking at like suites of genes and also selecting for particular like neural and hormonal connections. But I guess where I'm going with this is humans aren't polygamous. So are we looking at some kind of weird, meaning they have like harems of females? So does that mean that this is like, it's unavoidable? We were looking, is this a way, the rape's unavoidable? Does this mean that there's something that, there's nothing we can do about it?
Well, it's like I remember like reading part of it, and it said that the reason why like they could explain why men are more likely to rape is because like disadvantaged men who are unable to like secure a voluntary mate, or like people who receive like low consequences for doing the things that they did, and then men who suspected that their partner was unfaithful and may have just like resorted to rape. And so like it depends on like every individual and their just like capacity of like maintaining their like controlling their emotions and like how, like managing them in a mature manner.
Is it just the emotions, or the fact that we're a really social species, and that we, part of the human
Yeah, I
success
guess that too.
part of the human success story has been being about, making social promises and keeping social promises. And humans are really sensitive to getting taken advantage of. And so I think, I think that's where that argument ends up. It's like, when you break social contracts, then we result to anger. And but almost like, but does it really, saying that it increases your reproductive success, like it's a strategy to increase your reproductive success, um, it's it's hard to make, it's hard to test, like Vanessa said, and it's also, it like leads you down these dark alleys of trying to justify things, trying to justify crimes, and so there are crimes of desperation that I think that we can agree, like we can get, okay, I get where that would come from, but there are these crimes that result in breaking like particular pair bond, like social contracts, that I think we take even more seriously. Yeah, what do you think, Vanessa?
Yeah, I feel like there's this danger always when you try to explain criminal behavior with like biology or evolution, that you like go down the slope and you basically take the responsibility part away and you like basically say, oh yeah, that's because of something that's already predetermined, like that's because of biology and nature and not really because of them as a person. So I feel like it's kind of always dangerous to go down that road. So
Yeah. I mean, evolution has a long history of being, and lots of science has a history of being used to justify the way things are. And they're, and typically most like working scientists, most working evolutionary biologists, aren't, their first impulse and isn't always to be thinking about how this applies to humans directly, but it's easy for lay people, or easy for people with an agenda, to want to try to co-opt an argument for their side. And that's the thing that we always, I know I'm really sensitive to, and I think that's the thing we have to kind of watch out for if we're consumers of news, is,
mhm.
there are people who, use science, like this is how we see it working in like the fruit fly or in roundworms or something, so we can directly apply that to humans. It's I mean, it's sketchy, it's, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, and also it this sort of like reductionism, this genetic reductionism, that we can just boil down everything to our genes and then nothing else makes a difference. I think that kind of reductionism belongs on like the scrap heap of the 20th century. I mean, there's a lot of, just because we understand now, I think a lot, at least we're making more efforts to make sure that we understand how these social connections, phenotypic plasticity, and all these other kinds of things that can affect what the phenotype is, affect what behaviors are. I think we're taking those a little bit more, trying to quantify those better. Yes. What else is, anything in this article that wasn't as depressing as that? Or it's basically all bad news, isn't it?
Kind of.
Just like
It is an article
talks
about
about
criminality,
different
so
types
I
of
guess that's
like,
what we got.
yeah, it just talks about different types of abuse and like kind of tries to like, it just talks about different theories that could be possible and reasonings as to why certain behaviors are like um like still perform based on like evolution. So it like starts off with like spousal abuse, and like I thought it was really interesting how um it divided into like the two sexes. So it mentioned like how women may like abuse like it in order to like come off as a way to discourage abandonment, so like they can get like obviously the male to stay and take care of the offspring. And then by men it could be more so sexual jealousy, and like and the sexual jealousy could be built up over time because of infidelity in the past or suspicion of infidelity in general. And so like both sexes have reason to perform abuse for that reason, but I feel like I don't think that justifies the abuse itself.
From the outside, it's always easy to say, "Oh no, there's no justification for this," but
Mm-hmm.
these are people who reasoned their way to, or they found themselves in this, you know, in this position, and this is like the classic dichotomy of what men want and what women want. You know, the what seems to be something that's pretty typical, at least among straight people, is, you know, men feel men feel more hurt by like by losing basically primacy of access for reproduction, and women um, are respond most to, you know, like emotional distancing, or particularly loss of access to resources that the partner brings. You know, and this sounds like these are super generalities, and they sound crass when you just take them out of context. But this seems to be the kinds of things that make couples, you know, that make straight couples, you know, have these conditions where basically when they basically come to a point of rage because either someone's stepping out or somebody else isn't pulling what they kind of promised, you know. So I think that but that's the thing, like, why do we respond? Why do you think? Why do we, when we become frustrated, why does frustration lead to like rage?
I feel like in our nature we might already have this predisposition, but we like try to control it because like of the social contract and because we are social beings. But probably in those instances we kind of like lose control, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
I feel I feel like it could also like and like go back to like the whole a fight or flight mode thing, where like when someone feels rage, like on an evolutionary perspective, like it's like impacting you, it's harming you, so your instant like reaction is to like be aggressive. And I feel like that has just passed down, except society over time has changed, but like again we're humans, so like part of us would still like feel that way uh, in terms of where we came from.
Robert Sapolsky is a neuroscientist, primatologist out at Stanford. He wrote this book called Behave, which is really interesting about humans. It's like the biology of humans at their best and worst. I read that with one of my classes this summer. And I remember, and so, but the thing is, if you look at the way that our body responds to stressful situations, what you said, like the fight or flight response that makes you like fast and dumb, is the thing that tends to come first. You know, that's like in like your deep like mammal brain. If we want to think about like the more primitive parts of our brain, this is where we resort to first, because if you are trying to if you're trying to outrun a cheetah, you know, on the plains of Africa, you're gonna run like hell, or you're gonna lose your bacon, right? So like, so that's an adaptive response. But the same, if when you look at the way our brain responds to, uh, you know, getting anxious about a test, or things that are like completely socially constructed, you know, having an argument with a boyfriend or girlfriend, um, our brain responds the same way. Like it has the same chemical cues. So basically, the same things we use either to like run like hell or to stand your ground to fight. We resort to that for everything, even for emotional stress. So I think that, and the thing is like, and the reason why it's hung around so long is because it's adaptive, because it'll allow survival. But that's great if we're looking at this, you know, kind of whole red in tooth and claw, what they used to talk about evolution of you know, of survival in the wild. But it doesn't help you navigate social relationships. It doesn't help you navigate social contracts. So I think that's where I mean, I think that's part of the reason why it's adaptive. But then how come some people freak out and become violent and other people don't freak out and become violent?
I feel like on the one hand that could like suggest that there are certain genes that some people have, but on the other hand, if we're saying that it's like a thing that's like deep within our brain, it doesn't, I don't know, I don't really have a explanation for why some people are more violent than others.
I feel like it could also be the environment, because like mentioned before, like um sometimes like aggressive, victimizing, or manipulative behavior can like help them survive in an environment, versus some people didn't have to do that in their environment, and that's why those type like specific types of like traits like got passed down possibly.
Yeah. I mean, we have to look at, when we look at something as complicated as behavior, that's mediated by something as complicated as our brain. Our brain, which not only builds itself based on genes, but also builds itself based on the kinds of, because it's a learning machine, it changes its structure as it learns throughout life. So it's not just, this isn't the old nature versus nurture argument, because it's not nature versus nurture. It's always nature and nurture together. Um, and which always sounds like, I always call it like the classic college cop out. Like, people say, well, why can't we just get along? Maybe it's both. I hate maybe it's both arguments, because I like people to kind of like find a perspective and like defend it. But in this case, it really does seem like most of the traits that we look at are ones that are mediated both by the environment as well as what our genes are. So but then even in like the chemical control end of things, like related to genes but not the same thing as genes, are like hormones that are released by the body as well. And so like circulating levels of hormones are going to have effects on like how genes get, how the behaviors dictated that can be mediated by genes actually get expressed. So like testosterone doesn't make you aggressive. Testosterone, you have some borderline level of aggression that seems to be encoded by genes and experience. And then levels of testosterone are going to make it maybe increase or decrease, like whatever that, the increase or decrease, whatever that base level is. It doesn't seem to be completely in control of it. So it's not like, guys who are on low testosterone or people who have high testosterone are automatically some kind of crazed animals that need to be like darted or something. It's because but there's some people who are going to have, yeah, no, it doesn't stay the same throughout your whole life either. When you look at the ages at which people commit violent crimes, it's not distributed evenly throughout lifetime. So I think that there's, but it's also going to get tighter on, how hungry are you? What kinds of social bonds do you have to be able to rely on other people? This maps onto how people survive or don't survive addiction. There are a lot of things like that that our brains will tie into. So I think when we boil it down to it's genes or it's testosterone, then we're really missing a lot of the, a lot of the complexity around it.
Yeah, it's like always this interaction between like some of it is social construct, but it's not all of it, and then some of it is like biological.
Yeah, I mean, but like anything complicated, there are lots of ways to screw it up, and that includes not just like the meat of your brain, but also, yeah, social contracts that we have. What did you find? What did you disagree with when you read this?
And one thing about the spousal abuse that I didn't really think made a lot of sense was that they would, like I was saying, that males would intentionally induce stress to decrease the reproducibility of the female, and I don't know, it just didn't really make sense. Like, why would they do that if they want to reproduce themselves? So I didn't really agree with that point.
Well, maybe if they're worried about cheating,
Okay.
then maybe that's going, if you have somebody who's completely stressed out, if you have a woman who's completely stressed out because of, um, you know, how to put it, obviously an unhappy home, then
Hmm.
you say, well, basically it's like you're poisoning the well for any other cheaters, but I don't think that's the intention. I mean, if anything, this is like a lot of I don't think that's the plan. It's like, I'm going to decrease her. Watch how I decrease her reproductive success. It's going to be, I think this is just sort of resorting to rage. So we can sort of, in a backwards way, say, oh, this is how evolution works. But I don't buy that either. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else, Rhea? What didn't you agree with?
So there was a section on homicide, and it talked about, I think I could be pronouncing it wrong, but Daly and Wilson, and it talked like it justified homicide as like not an adaptation, but rather an unintended like consequence. So like a mistake or like a slip up. So it's like, oh, like he killed his wife because of sexual jealousy, but it's not because of some psychological mechanism. It's because like he was trying to control her through violence and it just happened to go too far. And I'm just like, you can't just happen to just kill someone.
Yeah.
Like, what?
No, I mean there are certainly ranges of. On the other hand, we recognize in the law there's murder and then there's manslaughter, and we talk about the different degrees of murder where these are things that are intentional or incidental. So I get that, but on the other hand, there's a band I used to listen to a lot, and still do. They have a line from one of their songs, which is you can't shake the devil's hand and say you're only kidding. So I think that's which sort of when it gets to that, it's like, well, I didn't mean to kill him. It just sort of happened. That's sort of it's a weird way to say that no one ever intends to kill anybody sounds weird. If you wanted somebody who didn't read what we read to come away with one take home message about the way that you think, thinking about things in an evolutionary perspective might change the way that we should see crimes or the way that we punish them, what's like one thing you would want someone to take away from this article?
That it's not like all 100% dependent on like society and like how your upbringing, that there can be some biological components that may make you a little more predisposed to engaging in that kind of behavior, but to not just separate biology and society as like two entirely different things, and to remember that it's like that they both play a role in it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would say something similar to that because I feel like there's a lot of factors that should be taken into consideration in terms of criminal behavior. At the same time, I don't think that just because it can be understood, it's justified or excused. There's just a lot of information that we don't know, especially about like how the brain works and what it can cause, and there's a lot that we do know as well. So I feel like it can be either, oh yes, something that actually went wrong through the gene, or it can be just nothing.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. This was fun. I'm glad to be able to see you both today. Why don't you just say thanks for watching?
Thanks for watching.